welcome back to the Pharmaverse Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. And if you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, well, then you're in the right place. Because we interview the brightest stars from all the corners of the pharma universe. And today's guest would certainly fit that description. Today, we're joined by Alex Albuquerque, MD, PhD, the CMO and head of medical affairs at Recordati. And we're going to be discussing how leadership is like wine, lessons learned from a Nobel Prize winner, and what working in pharma is like after you've been a patient. Now, before we hear from Alex, let me tell you about our sponsors. First, K. Bassman International, your complete recruiting resource in the life sciences. Our talent is finding yours. Please visit kbiclifesciences.com to find out more or contact me privately on LinkedIn. Also, the Pharmaverse Podcast is sponsored by Executive Biotech Advisors, a premier consulting company that is built on science, focused on strategy. If projects are piling up and you need an extra set of hands, call in the experts at EBA. And we're also sponsored by the Pharma Coach, an executive coaching platform that helps leaders build strong teams and cultures. Just like the best athletes employ coaches, the best pharma leaders go to the Pharma Coach. Well, now let's meet our guest, Alex Albuquerque. Welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Thank you very much for the kind words, Michael. It's a pleasure being here.
Well, Alex, I got to say, I've been so excited about this because you're one of the most interesting people that I know in industry. So, I mean, because when you think about it, you're a CMO, the head of medical affairs at Recordati. You're not only an MD, PhD, but you also have a law degree. And if that wasn't enough, you're also a sommelier. You taught French, culinary arts, you were a dog breeder and judge, and now you're into botanicals. Like, how do you even have time for sleep?
It's interesting that you asked this question. I think we all need to focus and release the pressure. I guess this is the way I release the pressure. And also, it's just an interesting, I have always been very willing to understand different standpoints and learn from different cultures, learn from different environments as much as I could. I think it adds a degree of diversity that I really appreciate. And I think that's why I've been so interested in different areas and I have so many different hobbies.
Yeah, I like your point about it's sort of an escape. We're under so much pressure at work. For me, it's writing. When I write, let's say I write, 35 to an hour and a half a day, it's like a little mini mental break in vacation for me. Is that the same thing with some of your hobbies?
It is. It is absolutely. It keeps your mind away, but at the same time keeps your mind busy and thinking about, you know, other elements that not necessarily are straightly related to the equation, but somehow related. And you learn from all of that. You rethink, you give it a different thought, a different perspective, and I think it adds to our ability to look into different angles.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, what I hope to do with this podcast is to kind of go through each of those hobbies and extract
Right.
leadership insights from each. But first, I want to go back to your childhood in Brazil because it's so interesting. You were telling me that you were very close to your grandmother. What leadership lesson or lessons did she teach you?
That's interesting. Yeah, I came from a big family, half Italian, and as many big Italian families, my grandmother had many siblings, and so as my mother. And whenever you come from families like this, and as in any family, the head of the family has to work with different expectations and different resources. You have to manage those expectations, right? And listen to the different points of view. Someone from the older kid, sometimes for the younger kid, all with different perspectives, all asking to be prioritized, and the ability to navigate through those different layers of prioritization, and at the same time making everybody feel listened and part of the journey is one of the lessons that she definitely taught me. I believe that the ability to understand the different points of view, but at the same time knowing that sometimes you have to say no, and that's okay to say no. However, any leader will understand that there is an art in saying no, and there is also an art in understanding different viewpoints, making people feel empowered, maybe make people feel listen and part of the journey, even if you agree to disagree. But that's the only element that could let anyone, as it does with the family, to move in the right direction and move it together. This is especially important for, whenever I think you are dealing with highly matrix organizations, as I did before, people say, oh, highly matrix organizations are difficult to lead because you need to build consensus. Not necessarily. You need to build a sense where people feel listened, empowered, and part of the decision making process. And they will say that is a great, that's okay to disagree with the decision. But as far as you feel them safe, listen, and move, they will be willing to move forward.
I liked your point about being able to say no. Um, I'm on a leadership journey too, trying to get better at leadership all the time. And I've identified in myself that I'm a people pleaser. And so saying no sometimes is really hard. But give me a context where a leader may have to just say no. And how do you go about that?
It's part of the journey, and I agree with you. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Is necessary for a multitude of reasons. The thing is, people think, especially. I came from Latin America and I lived in Asia Pacific in Europe before. I think, especially here in North America, we take no's in a very hard way. And it's not necessarily a hard thing. Saying no to someone does not necessarily mean a bad thing. And we take that, I think, more personally in North America than in other regions of the world. In other regions of the world, like in Asia Pacific, for instance, is very hierarchical. So it's a different way of conducting business. And if you communicate appropriately, there is a psychologically safe space for people to speak and for you to listen as a leader. And they feel that you are listening to them in your decision making process. They are okay, probably, to listen to a no. It wouldn't be even necessary to say a no.
Hmm, that's fascinating. Yeah, I didn't think of it culturally. That does make a lot of sense. Speaking of different cultures, you did some of your education at the University of Rome in Italy,
Yeah.
working with Rita Levi Monticelli, the Nobel Prize winner in genetic engineering, if I'm pronouncing that right. What leadership lesson did you take away from working with her?
I think discipline, leadership is also about discipline
Mm,
and the ability to be a little bit out of the box. One of the things that she did all the time, she always had time for her students. Sometimes not for the dean or for other important people,
uh,
and she made, but she always had time for the students. But I remember vividly my first meeting with her when I arrived, and there was probably an 8 a.m. meeting, if I remember correctly. And I was so anxious about it. And I arrived there probably around 7 a.m. waiting for her. She arrived a little bit before, and she didn't allow me to enter the room until 8 a.m. And at 8 a.m. sharp, she asked me to enter the room, and she asked, What time did you arrive?" I said, "Probably at 7 a.m." Said, "How many papers could you be able to read between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m.? What can you done between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m.?" And I was like, "Okay." And she said, when your time is so precious, time will never come back to you. So when I say 8 a.m. is 8 a.m. It's not 7:59, it's not 8:01, it is 8 a.m. That's a lesson that I learn, and I think it speaks also about a number of things on leadership. Meeting discipline, right? Today, we're not short of meetings back to back to back to back. And sometimes you need to ask yourself, how much this is useful for me and my team? Does everybody here in this meeting need to be here in this meeting? What is the goal of this meeting? And this is these are lessons that maybe sometimes I reflect we need to rethink and learn again and strategize and take serious measurements, actions as leaders about this. because it's really taking a lot of times is extracting a lot of value of our teams, especially in this virtual environment that we are.
Yeah, I can tell you, yeah, pharma is like traditionally 5 minutes late.
Yeah, true.
It's like you don't worry until you're at least 5 minutes late, and then you're just like, man, maybe he missed, doesn't know. But that's a really good point. I was raised as a baseball player, and the rule in my household is if you were on time, you were late. So we were always early, but it does make sense. You could get a lot done in that time.
Indeed,
Uh,
indeed.
you're an MD, PhD, but your dad wanted you to be a lawyer because your family history of being lawyers in Brazil. So you went and got a law degree with no intention of practicing?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, the short answer is yes. And I didn't practice. I went to law school because I was expected to be a lawyer, and it was kind of interesting because very soon into law school, I discovered that that was not for me. So I decided to pursue medicine, and I did for 3 years almost, both medicine and law. I gave the certificate to my dad and decided to pursue my career in
Wow.
medicine. But was a very interesting journey. You never know. I think most people believe that whenever you are developing yourself, even as a leader, you need to have a straight path. Most people I know that succeed in their careers and they're leaders now in different industries was not a straight path, and the fact that you need to drink from different fountains, you need to find different ways of interactions, different structures, different matrices, different ways of looking into the problem. And I can tell you today, especially in the work environment in the United States, is this ever changing law environment and all the complexities that is around the US healthcare system, that came very handy to have a little bit of a background in law school. But that's not different from everything else. I think what I would welcome anyone to, what I recommend to anyone willing to pursue a career in leadership, especially in the pharma industry, is really to try to look into different angles, try to move around. Because the way I look into things on medical affairs is different from clinical development, is different from pharmacovigilance, is different from regulatory affairs. And at the end of the day, that adds to your ability to understand what they are trying to say to you and relate to them and really building the consensus, which is not actually a consensus, but an agreement to move forward as a team.
I love that illustration, drink from many fountains.
Yeah.
What a visual that is. And it's sort of a nice segue into the next question because one of your passions is how did you become a sommelier?
Yeah, I started very very early. I used to say that my decision came when I was crying as a baby, and my grandmother, as you mentioned, was very attached to her, decided to put the pacifier and a little bit of sugar and a little bit of wine, and I
Ah,
stopped crying. I thought that's actually a very good idea, so I pursued that, I guess. And but wine is a lot about consistency. Even when we are judging a wine, it doesn't matter really what you like. Sometimes people misinterpret about wines about, okay, wine's about what you like. Yes, whenever you're drinking wine is about what you like. Whenever you're judging and studying wine is not about what you like, but actually about what the wine need to be. So you need to understand the wine based on what the wine is expected to express, based on the grape, based on the origin, based on the terroir, based on all the other aspects. And as far as the wine is faithful and correct in the sense that the wine was created for, is a great wine, even if you don't like to drink it. So this idea of separating yourself from what I like versus what this needs to be is actually a great lesson for leadership as well, because sometimes we want things to be like the way we want them to be,
so true.
but we need to understand the way they're supposed to be rather than how we like them to be. It's very true. And sometimes at medical, for instance, we face a lot of, I wouldn't say issues, but a lot of healthy conflict with regulatory, for instance, right? Regulatory trying to keep the barrier, medical trying to push the barrier. And this friction is healthy, but it's not personal. You need to understand that they are doing their job. They're supposed to be doing this, right? And it's your job to push the boundaries and find a compliant way to move forward.
There's a lot of leadership lessons in there. I like the idea of consistency. I think as the person in leadership, you have to be consistent, and I do think that I know I've fallen into this trap where I want to make somebody what I want them to be instead of, using their superpowers in the function that they're in and letting them just be them and be in that function. A lot of wisdom in a lot of that. When we were talking about wine last time, you were telling me that it's all about grape is all about the climate. Can you extrapolate a leadership lesson out of that?
Yeah, there's something about wines and climates and grapes and vines and vineyards that is very true. The only way you can create a great wine is when somehow the vine suffers. The vines thrive when it's hard to find water, it's hard to find nutrients. Whenever that's there, the grapes become more concentrated, more powerful, great for wines. Great wines don't come from very fertile soils. They don't come from, soils that has a lot of water. They just don't come from there. It's somehow similar to human beings, right? You need to keep yourself active and challenge your team and challenge yourself and try to move to the next level all the time. There is no such thing as perfection when it comes to, or status quo when it comes to industry. The status quo is the next level, right? And the next level and the next level. You need to pursue that excellence. The moment you stop pursuing that, you're dead, right? And there's only one certainty in pharma, especially in leadership in pharma, which is change. And you need to be prepared for that, and you need to prepare your team for that, to accept that as a constant, not in the bad sense, oh, this place is so unstable. No, but to embrace that as an opportunity to move everything to the next level. Think about the industry 10 years ago when you didn't have, artificial intelligence and many of the tools that today we look at us today. Is it better? It's worse? Well, that's not the point. The point it is different and will be different in 10 years from now and will be different 20 years from now. And we need to stop looking into that as this fight for nutrients, this fight for water, more as an opportunity, more as a way to learn more as, okay, let me learn about this. Let me try to adapt this to my day to day, to my leadership style. Be nimble, be mindful of that. And I guess embrace that as a constant in your life and in your work.
I mean, it's poetic that the best grapes come from struggling for nutrients. It makes me think of my children. It's like we work so hard to provide a better life for them. And at times I think, am I really providing a better life for them? Or if they had to struggle more, would it provide that better grape? I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think sometimes we want for others what we perceived as good and what we perceived as the correct thing. That's true. Whenever we are working, sometimes we believe that we are doing something because it's the best in our opinion for them. And that's where I think the element of listening and being diverse and being mindful of the environment needs to happen. Not necessarily what you perceive, it may be just your perception, right? And it's not necessarily. I had people that I thought in my life that would be great leaders. I would say, wow, this person needs to be a manager and will be a great leader. But the person actually never wanted to be a manager and is just a fantastic individual contributor. And I have to build the career or help build the career of that particular individual around being a fantastic individual contributor rather than a manager, because that was not what the person perceives as the best, right? Was my perception. And I think that's where you as a leader have to adapt and do the best for, yes, the company, yes, for you as a leader, but certainly taking into consideration the individual.
Good points. There was another thing about wine, and then we can move on to these other topics. There's one more point about wine that we were kind of kidding around about. I was telling you that my wife and I like this very inexpensive wine, Lambrusco. We had it at Olive Garden and we just loved it. It goes down pretty easy. And you said something that the quality of the wine has very little to do with the price, and that has stuck with me. In fact, I told her about it. How does that apply to maybe hiring or looking at an org chart in your mind?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I like sparkling reds. I
Did
think it's pretty nice and rare to find. There's no, it's true. There's no such thing as, a wine needs to be expensive to be a good wine. I can give you multiple examples, like the brilliant, heavily produced Sauvignon Blancs from New Zealand, for instance, or the produced Pinot Noirs from New Zealand. They're brilliant wines, absolutely perfect, but they are not necessarily expensive, right? We're talking about $10 a bottle or even less. That's true for people, right? And I think that's how much I value the time I spent when I left my clinical career in Brazil to go to Shanghai and to Singapore and then move to the United States is really understand the value of different people and culture, and how do they see the world, how do they see the problems, how do they see life and death, literally, and perceiving that different individuals have different viewpoints, and not necessarily what you consider gold standard is the gold standard, right? That adds to the beauty of diversity and adds to the beauty of leadership.
good. It's a good point. So I want to switch to a different topic. You've had in your life, you were a dog breeder and also a judge. And we can learn a lot about leadership through dog behavior, because leadership is not always about being the top dog, as they say. How do dogs choose who's going to be the leader in the pack?
It's interesting that you asked this question because dogs are very different from wolves. Wolves usually is the strongest, right? The alpha, right? Not necessarily dogs. Dogs have a different way of selecting. Sometimes it's the smartest of the dogs. Sometimes the smartest of the dog is the weakest of dogs, just very smart, right? And somehow, I guess dogs are more related to humans than wolves. It's interesting because I learn a lot about the social life of dogs and the way they choose their leaders and the way they all follow the leader independently of the different being stronger or weaker or having different behaviors. I think one of the beauties of life is whenever you are looking around and trying to understand the viewpoints by their eyes. Try to put yourself in their shoes. Try to put yourself and see the world from different angle. I was once in a company many years ago that I still value very much. And I guess I can name the company. It's Amgen. And there's a saying at Amgen that I have to my heart until this day, which is seek disconfirming information. And there's a lot there, right? You cannot have a team or individuals around you or everybody drinking the Kool-Aid. And that's where the psychological environment plays a big part of it, because you as a leader, you need to understand that whenever you say, I don't know, red is blue, there's a very likelihood that people around you will say, yes, that's blue, right? You don't want that. You definitely don't. That's a problem right there. And you need to surround yourself with individuals that challenge that disconfirm this information. And it's true for advisory boards, right? Think about it. In pharmaceutical industry, sometimes we try to build advisory board around the advocates of a certain product or a certain therapy. No, that's exactly the opposite. You need that information that does not agree where the company is going and try to understand why they have that idea of maybe don't work in this or that, or maybe have a different viewpoint. And that's what you want to make our clinical trials, our medical plans, and everything else stronger and bulletproof.
I want to ask a personal question. Hopefully, it's not too personal of a question, but in pharma, we all want to help patients. But when we become the patient, everything takes on a different light. Tell us what you're willing to tell us about your journey as a patient and how that helped shape your leadership style.
Yeah, that we're talking here about the fact that many years ago I was diagnosed with stage 3 upper urinary carcinoma. So it's a type of a rare type of kidney cancer, and was really difficult. I think the best lesson learned from that particular experience is that whenever you're touched by a disease, especially by cancer, you understand that you just don't have control over anything. You have an impression of control. I control my agenda. I control my weekend. I control what I do today and tomorrow. That's an impression that can be taken from you in a second. And suddenly you realize they have absolutely no control of absolutely anything in your life. So, and then you can deal this two ways. One, you can completely go bananas, and because you are not under control anymore, you will collapse. Or you can accept that and understand that this was only an impression, as I said, of control, and start dealing with this uncertainty a lot better. And I think it contributed a great deal to my ability to look into the ever changing environment, knowing that I maybe don't know what is around the corner. I maybe don't have 100% of the information to take a decision right now, but I'm fine with maybe 70, maybe 80% of the information, and take that decision knowing that probably we are going to have a very good likelihood of success. I think um, that's that it told me a very humble lesson that I keep it to my core. Whenever you are touching by something like cancer, it always puts you, putting yourself in the shoes of the patient is also very interesting. It can change you a lot in terms of leadership style. I was amazed by the fact that I was being treated one of the best institutions in the world for cancer, and there was simply a number over there, right? And eventually that changed very much because of my person become a very personal relationship between me and my clinical oncology, because he was also a clinical trialist and I work in the industry, and out of the blue I was sitting with him and he became my friend, and we are looking into his clinical trials. He is Dr. Dean Bajori. He retired from the MSKCC, and he was like one of the fathers of immunotherapy. And we ended up being very, very good friends. And I had the honor for being treated by him. But the fact that you look from the angle of the patient gives you a completely different perspective. Often I say the following: if I have to choose for never had cancer in my life, or have choose for having cancer stage 3 and going through chemotherapy, removal of my left kidney, and a year of immunotherapy, 100% I would choose to have cancer, because it changed my life so much. It taught me so many lessons. That was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me.
Wow, that is profound. I'm glad to hear you're doing well and healthy. And
Yeah.
as your friend, it pains me to know that you went through that, but it sounds like you were better for it. Let's close with one final topic. I love frameworks about leadership and about management. And you were telling me about the predictive index and how that's a really important tool for you as a leader. Can you tell us what that is and how it works?
Yeah. So predictive index is something that I've been using for over a decade now. It is a validated tool. It's one of the very few validated to predict how people behave in the working environment. That's important to mention. And it's validated to a point that you have to take. It's amazingly simple questionnaire. You have to answer a couple of questions and that's it. But it's so sophisticated that you have to answer in your mother language.
Mm.
Otherwise, you can get it wrong. So if you are natively English speaker or Spanish or Portuguese, validating multiple languages. It associates your predictive behavior to certain bucket categories, and each one has some, of course, strengths. I wouldn't say weaknesses, but ways of working. And it's an amazing tool if used correctly for leadership, because it tells us how to interact with people. And as leaders, we sometimes, quite often, we believe there is one way of communicating, right? It's not. Communication, especially when you are a leader, is all about how you communicate with different people and how you modulate your language to them, not vice versa. So I had many examples in my team of people that were equally capable of delivering a project. The difference was, for one, I had to say, hey, here's the project, here's the budget, here's the timeline. And I knew, because the predictive index, that this person will deliver within the budget, within the timeline, and a brilliant project. And if anything happens, the person will ask me the question because of the predictive index of that particular individual. I have other people equally capable that I have to say, this is the project timeline budget. This is how you're going to get there. These are the gates. I have to give much more detail and have, by the way, let's set up a weekly meeting to check on progress. Both projects will be delivered equally brilliant. But the way I communicate and the way they need to communicate with me was just completely different. And it's not about them communicating with me, but about me be opening to communicate in different languages, in different styles, in different paces, in different ways, so they can equally feel empowered to deliver a brilliant project.
I'll have to check that out. It reminds me of love languages. I don't know if you ever read
Exactly.
that. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
Exactly.
like I want to love you the way I want to be loved, but you may not receive love that way.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Sadly, we're out of time for the episode, but I can tell you on behalf of everyone that is listening, we've all grown as a result of it. Such interesting takes about different things. And if Dos Equis ever needs to replace the most interesting man in the world, I think you'd be a great candidate for that.
Oh no, but absolutely not. And what an honor for me to be here. It's been a great experience, and happy to participate anytime. It's truly an honor.
Well, that ends another episode on the Pharmaverse podcast. We have many great leaders lined up for you, so make sure you subscribe to the channel to not miss a single career enhancing insight. And I love to read your comments, so please drop me a note and look for us anywhere you get your podcasts. But for now, that's a wrap. See you next time on the Pharmaverse.